Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be looking into one of the most common accusations against the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Romans. Now, one of the most frustrating statements for non believers that are used by Christians is, you know that God exists in your heart, or any of the numerous versions of that. Now, I first want to say I do understand the frustration. It sounds judgy, comes across as an accusation of being insincere or just a sign of ignorance. However, I also think that there is a truth in that statement. Now, hold on before you click off or roast me in the comments or pelt me with virtual fruit. Hear me out. I think this is a classic case of two different languages being used. So, what's the background? Well, the point of contention is from what I can tell, primarily from a passage by Paul in his letter to the Romans. So, what exactly does Paul say? Paul states in chapter 1, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what might be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Yikes. That is some harsh language from Paul about non believers, especially considering he goes on to list some extremely harsh accusations against them. So, no wonder you have non believers feeling attacked, vilified, and judged by believers, especially those who are quoting this verse. Yet, there is something to understand and to take into consideration. What was the philosophical language and understanding held during the period that Paul is writing? Now, thanks to the Alexander conquest and the Roman Empire, Plato was being engaged with to the point that you actually had the rise of Neoplatonism in the 3rd century. In that understanding, knowledge had a different idea than what we currently have. To apply a term Aquinas used for faith, there was explicit knowledge, something that you know, and implicit knowledge, something you don't know, you know. Hold on. That doesn't make sense. How can you know something that you don't know you know it? Well, Socrates in Plato's book Meno is having a discussion on virtue with the titular character Meno. As part of the conversation, they get into a discussion on the nature of knowledge. Socrates argues that knowledge is not learned or shown, but rather remembered or recalled. To demonstrate this, he takes a boy who has no knowledge on geometry and, according to Socrates, doesn't teach him anything. But the boy then professes something as true without being shown why it is true. I do recommend reading the book, but it can get confusing to follow, especially in this part. In a nutshell, what he did was Socratic questioning to guide the boy to reason to the conclusion on his own. Now, this isn't the actual route that Socrates took, but this was effectively and is a decent summary. So Socrates asks, a line is infinite, correct? Yes. And 2 points share only one line, correct? Yes. And a set of parallel lines are ones that share no points, right? Yes. So a set of non parallel lines would share how many points? At least one, maybe more. Ah, but does that not contradict what you said earlier about 2 points sharing only one line? Yes. So then they can't share two or more points in common. I guess that's true. So how many points would a non parallel line share? Only one. Now, many of you would point out that this is a form of teaching, that this is the boy using simple logic and applying it to the problem with guidance to help him avoid mistakes, not recalling knowledge or having knowledge of something he was aware of. And I would agree with you, because the way we describe knowledge has evolved with different terms over time. Yet, we would agree that what was done is simple, easy to follow, and is achieved by a simple act of logic, correct? Now, this seems to be a different kind of teaching or a different way of acquiring knowledge that we never possessed, so to speak. For example, I would need to be taught that your mom's name is Sarah. I could never arrive at that with just logic. Yet logic is all that is required for the parallel lines example. So that kind of reasoning is called knowledge to Socrates, Plato, and many others in that sphere, even if the person doesn't explicitly know that they have that knowledge. Now, was Paul exposed to and what if he used such language? I would argue yes. Now, we don't have anything explicit, yet we do see him debating with Greek philosophers all the time. In fact, we see an account of such an event in Acts where he uses the sermon regarding the altar of the unknown God. So Paul is aware of and uses the language of the philosophers in his conversations with them. So here, when Paul is talking of knowledge in their heart, or how it has been clearly seen being understood from what has been made, or they claim to be wise, they became fools, he is describing a phenomena where people refuse to follow logic where it leads them to. Now, I understand that this does not seem to be a whole lot better, but again, give me a chance to elaborate. What Paul is referring to is individuals refusing to follow the logic where it leads, not those who are ignorant of the logic or the route it leads, but once shown, refuse to follow it. To use an example, it would be the same as someone who says they believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. They are not following the logic to its conclusion, either due to emotional biases, cultural biases, not understanding, or even worse, refusing to understand the evidence, or any number of things. Sometimes, sadly, it is self inflicted, and I think that is where the real crux of the issue is. Paul's language seems to suggest that it is always self inflicted, and that is what non believers are pushing against. That they are the ones in the comfortable and self made lie, that they are the ones deluding themselves. Now, two things to clarify. One, Paul is not talking about those who have left the church, rather, those who refuse to engage with it. Two, in the next chapter of Romans, he talks about Gentiles who still follow the law, even remaining as a Gentile, and that they will be judged favorably by God. So, for those who are sincere, those who are going as far as they go, they will be judged favorably as they are a law unto themselves, in the words of Paul. It is those who do what Aquinas describes as intentional ignorance, as opposed to invincible ignorance, that would be held accountable to what they ought to have known. So, what does this mean? This is an attempt at describing a phenomena that I think Carl Sagan was trying to describe with his extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence statement. What is often left out is his statement that he wants the extraordinary to be true, but we need to make sure it is supported by the evidence. I think the more apt saying should be something along the lines of a conclusion that demands much from one will require much to convince the listener. And that is the phenomenon that I see some skeptics engage in. And I get it. It is scary to change. It is the abyss that Nietzsche says will stare back. So Paul here is critiquing those who are not being sincere and instead intentionally avoiding where logic and reason guides them. So if you are sincere, you are the Gentile who is the law unto themselves. So rather than a condemnation of all non believers, this is a condemnation of pride while pretending to hide behind wisdom, which I will touch on in the next video. Thank you all for watching. If you like this content, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps get my videos out there, and y'all enjoy the rest of your day.